The topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Geeks, Geezers, and Googleization Show, the home of Googleization Nation, where we talk with HR and business thought leaders about the crazy shift going on in the world of business, technology, and HR. Here's your host, Ira Wolf, and co-host Keith Campagna.
Hey, everyone. Welcome back to Googleization Nation. Keith, you and I need to figure out a name. I'm wondering if people who listen are Googlers, but that's going to get confused with people who work at Google. So we need to come up with a name there. But we want to thank everybody for joining us again on our quest to transform HR. I got a question. Have you ever transferred your business to a new vendor because the employee that always took care of you moved on? Better yet, has your company been acquired or merged? Or if you're the owner of a company, are you thinking of doing that? And the question that comes up is, how did you value your most important asset, people? Management can probably tell you to the penny how much employees cost them, but don't seem to have a clue about how much value they bring other than hanging a bunch of posters and kind of stating people are our most important asset. But it comes to kind of the financials or just the value of the business, it seems to be this kind of escapable, ethereal piece of the business, which is one of the most critical. So we're hopefully going to change that today. We've got a great guest with Dave Bookbinder, and he's going to introduce us to the new ROI, the return on individuals. And Dave will join us shortly. Keith, you've known Dave for a while. You've been talking him up a bit, and appreciate you bringing him on the show.
Yeah, no, this is going to be a fun one for me and everybody, but I've been looking forward to this one for a while. You know, with the amount of attention, Ira, that I've been putting on literally return on investment. The last year with everything with JobVite, like I made some decisions, learned a lot about what I want to do when I grow up, right? And I'm having such a phenomenal time talking to serious movers and shakers about return on investment. And it fascinates me. Here you and I sit every week talking to these people in the middle of the HR shift show, so to speak.
Yep.
And there's this unbelievable momentum that's building up in the shadows. And that is the true way to quantify the value of a person inside of an organization. And to your point earlier, I mean, how many companies exist that don't have an ERP system, right? How many companies don't have an automated payroll system? There's all of these concepts about building the value for all of these projects so you could, invest and get the approval from the CFO. And nobody has been spending time, at least historically speaking, on what is the value of an individual inside of an organization. And Dave, he knows exactly what's up. This is a guy who does not come from HR. You know how much I like it when people talk about HR that are not from HR. This guy's a finance valuator. He knows the ins and outs and what makes companies really worth something. And I don't want to tell his story, but for those of you that are out there trying to figure out how to actually attract and retain, you might want to start with who you have. And there's a lot of cool ways you can figure out how to do it. I'm excited.
Yeah, it's amazing, and I'll share the story when we get there a little bit. But many of the listeners know, some may not. You certainly do. My prior career, I had a dental practice, sold it 25 years ago. Hard to believe. Been doing this 50% longer than I actually what I was trained to do. But when I sold the practice, a big part of that was goodwill. I had a lot of systems in place. I had we had one of the biggest practices in Lancaster County, central Pennsylvania. When I sold it, a lot of the value, there was a building, there was a lot of equipment. Everybody thought the equipment was the expensive part. And truly is when you sell it, I knew the relationships were with the people, and one of the key people was leaving, was me. But I knew there was a value on the systems I had in place. There was a value on the team that I had in place. They had been with me. Many of them had been with me from the start or almost the start. And but it was really, really hard to come up with the valuation for them. And, we talked about it as goodwill. And the goodwill was with the patients, and the goodwill with the patients was assuming the patients would stay. But, patients don't, especially in a dental practice where they have options to go. I mean, we weren't tied to any insurance plans. They can pick up and go. But as long as the staff was there, as long as the employees were there, the people would continue to come. But it was really hard to get anybody to even accept that principle in there. And, everybody was counting charts, and they were counting pens and paper and equipment and depreciation. Yet I knew that if they retained, that if my ex-partner didn't, he kept the team in place, the people would stay. We won't go into what he did wrong, but
what he could have done differently.
Yeah, but I actually, just from a value of that is 25 years later, I still get birthday cards. I get greetings. I'm still connected to 75% of the staff. I still am connected to people on Facebook and get inquiries, and people find me on an article or something I read. And I'm still got some activity going on in Lancaster, but it had nothing to do with dentistry. But I'll run into people, and they remember. They remember stories I don't remember. They remember, of an instance, and some of them now have grandkids, and they remember that, bringing their own children, how fearful they were. So, there's, the bottom line is there's just a tremendous amount of the people, but, going through that experience, myself, is I was thinking like you and Dave are thinking, is that there's a tremendous value on this. And I know that to be true, that people would have stuck around because it's happened to other people, is when something happens to the primary owner, people stay if you continue, if the relationship is more than with one person. But companies just don't seem to have a clue.
It's incredible. The same companies will say that the only true differentiation they have in the entire industry that they serve is their people.
And they don't know how much it's worth. Yeah, the only thing we have is our people. The only thing we have is our service. And yet we're going to sell it, and it shows up nowhere on there. So we're going to talk a lot about that. And so before we get there, I got a couple things. So one is we got to thank Zor.ai, again, for being a sponsor, and Success Performance Solutions. Help us be on the air every week. And please make sure you go to for everybody who's listening, go to googlizationnation.com. It's free. And you'll get notices about our upcoming shows and guests, and access to our past shows, and a couple other bonuses I got planned. You'll also get some notices about discounts to the Recruiting in the Age of Googlization Learning Hub, invitations to some webinars, thinking about soon to live contests, live streams, a whole bunch of stuff. And again, it's just free. It's kind of our newsletter, just to keep you up on things. And speaking of the Recruiting in the Age of Googlization Learning Hub, I made a small change. I had a bunch of requests. I had started it out as a 12-month subscription, and everybody to have access to all 30 lessons that are in there now. And then I plan to add about 50 more, a lot of videos, live streams, interviews, all about improving the candidate experience, recruitment, talent acquisition. But a few people just said, hey, we'd like to start smaller than that. We'd like to and we really like what you're saying about candidate experience. So I carved that part out. I just launched it the other day. And in fact, if you go to successperformancesolutions.com, that's successperformancesolutions.com, top button in the header, just click on it, and it'll take you there. It's now just the candidate experience. I'm offering that as a part, just the candidate experience section. There are 27 videos there now. By the end of the month, there'll probably be 3 more. It's approved for 3 SHRM professional development credits too. So, and you've got 90 days to do it. So,
and by the way, have we figured out, congratulations on all that stuff, dude. But have we figured out how to help get those HR listeners credits for listening to the podcast?
Yeah, we're going to put that in there. Part of it is just the time. We got to take each podcast, and I got to load it into the Learning Hub, and then we got to.
You're gonna tell us all about it.
Yeah. So yeah, we're getting there. It's just
all right.
It's just time, but that's hopefully within the next few weeks it will be there, and we'll definitely be able to do that and offer it for SHRM credits. What else?
So now.
Yeah, most important thing I got. Not most important. Most important thing is getting Dave on the air. But one more announcement. I didn't mention about the book. Less than 3 weeks, February 4th. That's 3 weeks yesterday. My new book will be out. Recruiting in the Age of Googlization Edition 2.0. Actually, it's only 2 weeks. So is Googlization Edition 2.0. Will be in the bookstores and Amazon. But I'm giving away first 1,000 copies for free. First come, first serve. All you pay is shipping and handling, so you can go up and reserve your copy at join.googlizationnation.com. That's join.googlizationnation.com and get a free copy of Recruiting in the Age of Googlization Edition 2.0. We are live, too, so you can call if you got questions for Dave, myself, Keith, 561-623-9429. 561-623-9429. Now, let's get to our guest, Dave Bookbinder. He's a valuation expert, best-selling author of the book, The New ROI, and he's a host of his own podcast, Behind the Numbers. Dave, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here, guys.
Yeah, we got a lot to talk about. You heard the intro. Lot going on. Huge gap. I mean, you talk about the lack of metrics in a business, and it's often HR is considered the soft stuff, but it's pretty hard numbers, hard and fast numbers when it comes to what's your business worth, especially for a publicly traded company, but even a private company that's looking to sell. I know a lot of people looking to sell, and they always put this somewhat intangible figure on the goodwill, but rarely do I see the employees figure it in that. So let's talk about that. Where do we start?
Well, we can start from the beginning if you want to start about valuation and how people are thought about in terms of the overall construct of a business enterprise.
Yeah, perfect. Perfect place.
Yeah,
so
tell the audience, Dave, where you came from, because it's conversations like these that executives tend to kind of brush to the side, and you are not, because they feel it's like an HR fad, another HR fad, right? But that's not the case with you. So the more the merrier with regards to how you got here. Thanks.
Yeah, and that's a great way to start, actually. So thanks for that. Maybe set the frame by talking about my background and how the book came about, because to your point, I'm told regularly by folks in the HR space that what really resonates with them, with regard to the message around the book, is that I'm not a typical person who'd be talking about these kinds of things. I'm a finance person by background. I've spent my entire career in corporate finance. I've got several professional designations in the field of business valuation and valuation of intangible assets. And over the course of my career, I've helped literally thousands of companies with matters pertaining to valuation and valuing their businesses and their IP. One of the intellectual property assets or intangible assets that I valued throughout my career is human capital. And I was take a little detour here for a second. I was a single dad for a long time and wound up working for some bosses that were really great, understood what the challenges are being a single dad. And I will tell you that I was super engaged working for them. I'd walk through fire for them. When you talk about discretionary effort, there wasn't anything I wouldn't do for them. Also had the opportunity to work for some folks who were not quite so nice, not quite so considerate, who might do an eye roll if I had to go pick up a sick kid at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Hey, it must be nice to leave the office at 3 o'clock when the rest of us are here, not understanding at all what that meant, or that I'd be back online after the kid went to bed and so forth. But when I think about how we value human capital in the valuation world and living it as an employee and as a human being, it occurred to me at some point that the methodologies that we use, in my opinion, don't really tell the whole story. And I didn't really do much about it for quite some time. And then one day, from some inspiration from some colleagues, decided I was going to write an article about how people really should be valued differently. And I need to be super careful because I didn't want to throw any stones at my profession and talk about, we don't do it the right way, and had to be careful not to throw stones at the accounting profession because people don't actually appear on a financial statement, even though most people are considered the most valuable asset, right? That's a whole other topic. Anyway, I wrote this one article, and the article got some traction, and it became a series. Then it became an online community, and then the book just sort of happened. It happened organically. I never sat down and said, I'm going to write a book about this stuff, but the book really documents my journey to understanding that people really are a company's most valuable asset, which was always my personal belief. And the book is the story about how I was able to, dare I say, document certain data and other opinions on why that's actually the case empirically.
So I've got a question for you, and this is something that I think, candidly, Dave, I think I've been waiting until the podcast to ask you. I have it somewhere in the back of my head that there were laws written in the 60s or maybe 70s that says that a corporation, by legal definition, is not the it's not the employers, and it wound up becoming, I think it's legislation, and the outcome of that was that CEOs could run businesses unethically without having to worry about that becoming a personal matter. And I don't know if that was the original intention, but it certainly took place. And ever since you and I started talking and you opened my eyes to this, I wonder if the reason why human capital was never a part of the financial capital reports or the valuations, because it was never supposed to be there in the first place. Like, am I trying to put a square peg in a round hole, or is there something to that?
You may be. I don't think it's as maybe nefarious as anything like that. In fact, when I first entered my career in valuation, the assembled workforce did in fact appear on the balance sheet. It was subsequently removed, and human capital, or the assembled workforce, if you will, gets subsumed into goodwill. That's where the human capital winds up today. So it's not a specific line item. I personally believe that people are the most valuable asset, and my hope is that at some point there will be a line item on the balance sheet that speaks to human capital, and I happen to believe it's going to happen.
So, Dave, I mean, you brought up goodwill. I mentioned that earlier. Certainly, when I sold my business, that was a huge part of it. I mean, yeah. in fact, that was a fraction of it, because that's where the revenues came from. The revenues didn't come from the equipment sitting there. So, how is what you're doing different? Is it just an extension of placing a value on goodwill? Or how have you extended that?
Yeah, so let me explain how the assets wind up on a balance sheet. And goodwill is a big part of a lot of transactions. We're involved in valuing intangible assets most of the time after a business is acquired. So deal's closed, we know what the purchase price is. There may be value ascribed to, we'll call it the hard assets. And then whatever is left over between the purchase price and the value of the hard assets goes into what we'll call an intangible asset bucket. So we value what's called the identifiable intangibles, and the usual suspects of identifiable intangibles are things like customer relationships, trademarks and trade names, and technology assets. And whatever is left over after the valuation of those identifiable intangibles winds up in goodwill. The way the assembled workforce is valued, it's a methodology that's called a cost to replace method. And basically, for the folks in the HR community who are listening in, they can probably relate to it because it looks largely like a turnover calculator. And we calculate the value of the assembled workforce for one reason only. It's considered to be a contributory asset. And what that means is that, for example, the value of your customer relationship asset wouldn't be as valuable if you didn't have an assembled and trained workforce in place to service those customers. So we calculate the value of the workforce essentially to ascribe a rental charge against the value of the customer relationship asset. That's what happens. I personally don't believe that captures the whole story. There are a lot of others who also share my view. Many of them are in the book, but interestingly enough, several of my new ROI colleagues and I did a keynote webinar with an organization called BVR, Business Valuation Resources. And they invited us to bring this new ROI construct to the business valuation community. And they told us it was one of the most highly attended webinars that they've ever done, and the interaction with the audience was just phenomenal. So I think there's a growing consciousness about how we in our profession may actually start to think about human capital.
So there's a whole bunch of thoughts that I got running through my head. So one is, from a finance side, it seems that this also seems kind of anathema to how HR thinks, because as soon as you attach a dollar value to an employee, everybody says, hey, we're not widgets, we're not equipment, there's more to that. So how, is that something that you see going away, or how does that argument or how does that objection from what many HR folks feel when you start talking about putting people's value on a P&L or on a balance sheet?
Yeah, that's probably a deeper question than you may even realize, because
I realize it's pretty deep.
Yeah, there's so many layers to peel back there, because right now, with people not being on a financial statement as an asset, frankly, there's almost a perspective of who really cares. What does it matter to put a real number on the workforce, right? What does that truly matter? My lens is, let's take it one step further, and let's talk about the impact that people have on the value of a business enterprise, because then you can really start to understand what that impact is. And it all gets connected when you start to think about happy workforce is a more engaged workforce. A more engaged workforce is a more productive workforce. Greater productivity is going to result in greater profitability, and that's ultimately going to impact your valuation, right? All the things equal. Those are the dots that I'm trying to connect. And when you talk about what the future may hold in terms of how employees and the human capital asset, if you will, is considered, there's certain movements afoot in terms of, we'll call them smart money investors, who are social capital conscious, and they're doing things like petitioning the SEC, for example, to afford greater disclosures around the human capital investment. So just as a quick for instance, as an investor, if you knew, for example, that management at a particular company turned over at a 20% clip, would you still want to invest in that particular business? The leadership team turns over every 5 years. You may want to look elsewhere. So there's a whole host of other kinds of disclosures that the SEC has in front of them right now. And when you combine those kinds of petitions with the smart money investors and folks like BlackRock, who are talking about doing good for social justice and employee relations and things like that, there may be pressure enough to get people back on a financial statement as a disclosure item, as an item on the balance sheet. If that happens, then I think everything changes, because then the perspective is this really is an asset and it's no longer just an expense. And then from there, I think you're going to see greater change.
And just to chime in a little bit on this one, and then we're coming up on the break here, but for those of you that are out there thinking that this is a bunch of finance mumbo jumbo, there's ISO 30414. This is an international standard that's basically requiring certain metrics as it relates to human capital. And Dave, you probably know more about this than I do, but the SEC is, as a matter of fact, drafting, if I understand it, they're drafting new regulations as it relates to the reporting elements, so that you have to report certain human capital metrics. And I think it's supposed to be mandatory by 2022. So this is stuff that's really happening. This isn't just some sort of idea that you need to maybe pay attention to.
Yeah, there's definitely a groundswell, and it's not just me talking about it. Obviously, there are a whole host of others. The way some of my new ROI collaborators describe it is that we're all climbing the same mountain. We're all just coming up different sides, but we all have the same goal.
Yeah.
And Again, there's a couple things when we come back from break I definitely want to talk about, especially moving more to a digital world and AI. But one of the things, just to kind of tease that out, would be that you mentioned something about valuing your business, but knowing that, and again, workforces are still struggling to figure this out. You've got a workforce of median age is 53 years old. You're selling the business. What's the likelihood of many of those people being around for 5 or 10 years, and how would that affect those relationships? And again, that's not uncommon. There's many businesses that way, and that's certainly one of the reasons that I've heard this said to me face to face. I'm thinking to get out of my business because it's just going to be too hard to replace all these people. Yet they put a significant value on current day value with those people in place. But in 3 to 4 years, what's the value of that business when 3/4 or half of their workforce leaves? And that's what you're talking about, right?
That and a whole host of other things. What you're referring to there is basically the loss of institutional knowledge. And it's a subtle thing, but even if you have a planned exit and an employee is transitioning out, and you do your best to capture all the mind share and document their day-to-day and hand off all their duties and relationships to clients and other company personnel, there's still things that they know, real subtle things like their boss's proclivities and how the boss likes to receive information. Who do you go to when you need a certain supply? Things like that. And it's a subtle shift, but that institutional knowledge walks out the door and you don't get it back. And that definitely impacts the business.
Yeah, and it just raised another question. We had a great guest last week, Charlene Lee. We talked about the disruption mindset. So when we come back, I want to talk a little bit about how AI may accelerate this or disrupt it or change it. Also about a lot of companies going through a transformation themselves. That certainly affects the value of the people and so much more. Hey, you are listening to the Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization show. We're with our guest, Dave Bookbinder, a valuation expert, author of The New ROI. Fascinating conversation. We're just literally scratching the surface here. We're going to take a short break. We're going to hear from our sponsors, Zor.ai and Success Performance Solutions. So stay right where you are. We'll be back in 2 minutes.
Imagine how your company would grow if your candidate experience earned a 99% approval rating. Well, to get to 99%, you need the 3 best letters in recruitment technology, XOR. Zor's text bots, chat bots, and audio bots increased IKEA's candidate conversion rate 455%. Zor decreases candidate drop-off rates, improves your candidate experience, and collects analytics for future strategies. To learn more, check out Zor.ai. That's XOR.ai.
Hi everyone, this is Ira Wolf, author of Recruiting in the Age of Googlization. I'm excited to announce that my online course, Recruitment Marketing for the Accidental Recruiter, is open for business. This course is the culmination of a 2-year-long project and releases recruiting tips I've learned after hundreds of hours of research, speaking with thousands of conference attendees, and interviews with dozens of experts. It's all available to you in Recruitment Marketing for the Accidental Recruiter. To receive more information or get started, visit our website at www.successperformancesolutions.com and click on the tab, Recruitment Marketing for the Accidental Recruiter. Hey, welcome back everyone to the Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization show. I'm your host, Ira Wolf, with my co-host, Keith Campagna, and our guest today is Dave Bookbinder. We're talking about valuing the most important asset within a company, which is people. We've been talking about it for decades, as long as I've been in this business and even before. Yet it finally seems that, with Dave's work and some of his colleagues, we're starting to break the ice on that. But there was something that's kind of Dave mentions. It's at the top of his webpage. I read this. I actually put it out as a link earlier on LinkedIn to promote the show. And his statement is, the value of business is a function of how well the financial capital and the intellectual capital are managed by the human capital. I think that's pretty profound. And then he closes with, you'd better get the human capital part right. So let's talk about getting the human capital part right. Dave, you mentioned before, and I'm fascinated with this because, again, there's so many studies that are out there. I was writing an article on motivation this morning, and, it's like, what's the cost of low employee engagement? What's the cost of low motivation? What's the cost of turnover? There's millions of stats of what it costs to replace people, but it doesn't necessarily accurately put a value on the people that you have. It's no different than what's the value of my home, what's the value of my car, when it's working versus if it burns down to the ground. So it seems like if I lose it, here's what I lose, but nobody seems to know if I keep it and I maintain it and I nurture it, what's it really worth? And that's kind of the direction you and the industry is moving, right?
Well, I certainly hope so, because as I mentioned, I think there are things that we can include in our calculations to allow them to tell more of the story. So right now, like I said, the analogy for our methodology is somewhat like an HR turnover calculator, just the cost to replace. And it doesn't consider any of the indirect costs. So I think at a minimum, and I talk about this in the book, that you can probably consider a lot of the indirect costs, but I think where the real fun gets into the conversation when you start factoring in things like an engagement or disengagement factor. Because as you just alluded to, if you've got an engaged workforce, it's certainly going to be more productive, and that's where you're going to get the discretionary effort, and that's where you get the real big impact on profitability. It seems like engagement in the U.S. and frankly worldwide has been roughly around 1/3, right? So the way I like to think about engagement and talk about engagement is I use like a lifeboat analogy. So imagine your company is a lifeboat, and you're heading towards safety, and you've got 3 people in the front who are fully engaged and they're rowing hard and trying to get to that destination. There may be 4 people in the middle who are just kind of kicking back, looking at the icebergs, and there's another 3 in the back of the boat who are trying to sink you. So if you can get more of those people rowing in the direction that you're trying to go, just imagine what the impact could be.
For sure. And I think that's a direction that, one of the things that you mentioned before, even on replacement costs. I mean, I'm certainly not an advisor on this, and probably my weaker points is probably finance. But from a strategic level, I've had people say, how do you value your business, or how can, do you know anybody who does it, or can you, can you look at this? And one of the things that I often ask is, what's the likelihood that after its transition, an acquisition or a merger, that the people that you sort of purchased with, or part of the purchase are going to stay? And then how do you place that value on there? And we sort of, we've been talking about that. But on an everyday basis, this allows people to have a value on employees. And is it worth, if that person happens to leave because we don't offer them a 7% increase, or we don't provide training to them, how does that affect their value today? And it has nothing to do with the merger or acquisition. It's just putting that value on. And again, companies are really struggling with that. But one of the things that I've brought this up oftentimes with AI is really getting more predictive. So, it'll be interesting to see, and I don't think you have an answer for this, but I'd love your comment. It'll be interesting to see that going forward, that if I'm going to purchase your company, that I want to know what's the likelihood that the top performers, the top people, the key individuals are going to stay, and how long. Because that's where a lot of companies are moving with AI today, is that they're able to predict that if they bring this employee in, within 37 months, this person may get itchy and start to accept job offers. And one of the key points of people being open to accept a new job offer is exactly at the time either a manager changes or a merger or acquisition, which means
don't think for a second that recruiters aren't noticing that on LinkedIn.
Right? Well, that was where we had interviewed. I mean, that one company, Engaged Talent, that's their business, is predicting when other people, their AI predicts when other people are going to leave. And the people using it aren't the internal people, it's the external people, because they recognize that they map, they track, hey, there's a management change over at that company. So everybody that's been there for 3 years or under is probably has got a 75% chance of accepting our call now, where 2 weeks ago they wouldn't. And so, throw that into the evaluation, Dave, and it gets really, really interesting, how AI is going to may impact this, or make it, make valuation even more critical.
Yeah, so there's a lot there, and I was trying to scribble some notes so I could at least address them. But when you talked about the impact of the key people on a merger or acquisition, and then their potential subsequent departure, a couple of things came to my mind. One is, depending on where you get your data, anywhere between like 75 and 90% of M&A transactions don't actually produce the desired synergies. And the number one reason for that over time has been, without question, the inability to integrate the human capital, bringing the two cultures together. So turnover risk is definitely huge, especially, like you said, in the event of a merger or acquisition. But here's the good news. And we talk about this with one of my new ROI colleagues, Dave Nast, who's got a tool that he uses to help actually use some predictive analytics to help to identify the rock star employees. And that can be defined literally based upon the company's criteria. They could literally pick out, well, Fred Bloggs over here, he's an exemplary employee. We want everybody to look and behave like him. There are tools that companies can utilize to literally, what my friend Dave describes as mapping the corporate genome, to replicate and identify who those key people are. And once you do that, there certainly are tools that can be used to incentivize people to stay. You can incentivize them with ownership interest and things like that, or retention bonuses. But at the end of the day, you really have to make it an environment where people want to be, and that's the key thing. Going on a little bit of a tangent here, if I might, I saw your LinkedIn post in promoting the show, and one of your audience members responded about some of the cynicism around culture, and referencing things like ping pong tables in the break room don't drive culture. And I couldn't agree more. The CEOs and other leaders that I've interviewed and just chatted with, anecdotally, who have done good things around building their business, all have the same theme, and it's about a mission. And if you can get people to buy into the mission, then you build their trust, you build their loyalty, and everything spirals upwards from there.
I mean, just human nature. I mean, and again, doing a lot of work in this particular area, especially with motivation and what drives people, and what's going to drive engagement. I mean, people talk about leading with purpose, but ultimately, people want a purpose. They want to know that they're valuable, and whether it's that they're valued by their family, by their community, by their boss. They want to know that, one is they're valued, and second is that they feel that they have an important role. And there's a lot embedded in there, but it all comes down to that. And companies just haven't been very good. I mean, going back to Frederick Taylor's whole method of management, which unfortunately is still in place in many companies. And that's the danger, I guess, that we get into when we start putting values on a dollar value on people. People sort of say, "Well, I thought we got rid of that philosophy, 100 years ago," but this is different. I mean, this is really using it in a much more positive way than just putting a number on somebody's head.
Yeah, and what you said really should have a lot of resonance with everybody who's listening to this, because it's so simple. At the end of the day, like you said, everybody wants to feel valued and appreciated. So for those who are in a leadership role that are listening, when was the last time you thanked an employee for a job well done? A simple thank you. When was the last time you sat down with somebody and checked in with your team? Do you know the names of the kids of your employees? I mean, it's all personal. Business is personal. And if you don't build that interpersonal relationship and people don't feel like they're valued and appreciated, it's an uphill climb.
And it's, there's a couple models we use. My core business has been assessments, doing a lot with helping companies create a better candidate experience, which fits into what we were just talking about. But I use a model, I've mentioned this before, and Keith, I've mentioned it to Keith. It was one of my first books I wrote. It was Business Values and Motivators. And, if all you know about your people, I know we can know about their personalities, behavior, and personality. I actually do know Dave, and Dave, I think, uses one of the assessments, one of our competitors, but he uses one of our assessments. But the business value and motivators gets down to something real simple. People are motivated by learning, by kind of what we call aesthetics, but it's kind of their environment, work-life balance. The kind of, what do they feel their role is? Culture, art, money, power, community, and or a particular doctrine, something they believe in. So there's learning, aesthetics, economics, power, community, and doctrine. If you knew that about your people, that's what motivates them. I mean, what I personally value, what I want out of the job. Maybe I need money, but I don't need money because I want to have the biggest house in the block. Maybe I need money because I'm worried about training, about educating my kids. And that means I have a high learning profile. Or maybe it's because I just want to own them. I just want to own the biggest toys on the block. Or maybe I want to be a philanthropist. What's in it for people? And that's ultimately what it is. It's what's in it for me. So there's a lot of ways to get there. And it's good that people are starting to at least pay attention, because if you don't pay attention, then nobody cares.
Exactly.
And the part that freaks me out is that this is how people have been driving business revenues the entire time. It's like the mantra, and I know that I just sound like another person who's worked for a company who hasn't followed through on putting their people first, like the brochures say they do, but like it seems so obvious. And Dave, you mentioned how you better get the human capital part right. Where do you see the value of human capital as it relates to or compares to intellectual capital and financial capital?
I personally think it's the most valuable asset. And unfortunately, right now, the methodologies, like I alluded to, that we have to adhere to don't give us the ability to demonstrate that. But that's my personal belief, and like you're saying, a lot of other folks do as well. And I know we're getting close to the end here. I think we are anyway, but I just want to make sure that I cover this one point, because it's really worth sharing, because we started about the journey of this new ROI book and the whole process. It was really a quest to understand that what we all described as our intuitive belief on this matter really is the truth. And there's a whole host of data that's available if you go looking for it, that really clearly demonstrates in terms of the way certain mutual funds have been put together from an investment style and others, where it's so blatantly obvious that companies that are doing the right things around their workforce, making the investments in training, doing the right things around culture, we'll call them the great places to work, they outperform their peers. And that's the reason for it. It's the people.
Yeah. Is there an example of a company or two that you can mention that has, not that they value their company, not that they got great engagements or they won the best place to work award? I can say that 3 times fast. But are there any good examples you can think of that people have done a good job of evaluation, or any case studies that people can go to?
Yeah, well, there's a number of case studies. There's a couple in the book, and there's going to be more in what ultimately will be book number 2. And I'll be honest with you, I'd rather not talk about any of the publicly traded companies. I think I'm precluded from talking about those kinds of things. But what I can tell you is that from the CEOs that I've interviewed, and we're talking about this culture shift, it starts with them becoming intentional. It's not just, okay, we're going to tell people, hey, we're going to do some new things here and we're going to value you. It takes time, and it has to get baked into the DNA of the organization where people start to believe you. One CEO who I mentioned in the book implemented a no a-hole policy. I don't want to say the word and get bleeped, but we all know what that means. And the interesting thing is they enforce it. And they've created an environment there where the people truly understand and believe that leadership is all in on culture, that they are doing the right things They demonstrate it every day in every possible way. And what the company has seen as a result of that directly is increase in sales, increase in profitability, decreases in absenteeism, better safety records, every metric. They've won awards. It's directly correlated, and they will tell you all day long it's a result of their intentional effort to reframe the way they run their business.
And I think this is an indirect measurement, and you may be doing it already. But it's not only valuing the people, but it is putting a value on the culture. If the culture is in place and it's not driven by one charismatic leader, which doesn't mean that's where it's not sustainable, but putting a value on the culture of the company would be huge as well. Kind of a valuation. I don't know where that's headed.
Yeah, that's another good topic. But there are some folks out there, some who I've collaborated with, who are doing the correlation of culture and value and aligning brand and culture and what that means and coming up with coefficients of engagement. And my hope is at one point, somewhere down the road, when people are back on a financial statement, we'll be able to do some good correlation analysis and understand the impact of growth in key metrics inside the organization and growth in their equity values relative to their investment in people, and also capture that little nuance around the engagement coefficient and bake that into some of the formulas that we use to not only value people, but to also value a business enterprise.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a good point. A lot of it right now is correlations. The fact that hey, our revenues went up, and we had the highest score we ever had on engagement. I think there's a lot of assumption in there, and whether that's sustainable or not. If the revenues dip a little bit, does it go down? And if you have a good culture, it should be sustainable throughout ups and downs. So, but we are almost out of time, so we definitely are going to have you back, for one form or another. So many more things to talk about, and obviously this is just the beginning of a long journey. So,
it'd be my pleasure. I'd be happy to come back, and I thank you so much for allowing me to join you today.
How can share how people can get a hold of you? I've mentioned the book a couple times, but mention that, where they can get that, how they can get a hold of you.
Yeah, so a couple of things. There's a LinkedIn group. There's also a small Facebook community for the new ROI, Return on Individuals. But LinkedIn is a much more vibrant community. So for anybody listening that is a LinkedIn member and wants to check out the new ROI LinkedIn group, I invite you to check that out. As you mentioned at the beginning, I do host an internet TV show and podcast called Behind the Numbers. You can find that anywhere where you get your podcasts. And if anybody wants to learn more about me, they can find me on LinkedIn, Facebook, or Twitter.
Dave, we just met less than an hour ago, and it's been fascinating. So I'm sure you and I will be doing a lot more talking. I know you talk frequently with Keith, and definitely a conversation to be continued. So thanks very much. Very enlightening.
Yeah,
my
thanks,
pleasure.
Bud.
Look forward to doing it again.
Keith, thank you for introducing Dave to the show and to our community and our listeners. Again, just scratching the surface. Barely.
Yeah, it really is. And I've been talking to you about this the whole time, right? It's amazing, this perfect storm, so to speak, of talent marketplace and the way that you can now prove that you are a better company because of the value of people, not the cost.
For sure. Again, so I've got like 3 pages of notes here and questions and ideas, and so we'll continue this conversation for sure. We're almost at the end of the show again. It just keeps going faster and faster. It's amazing.
Next week.
Next week we've got Jason Averbook, so from LeapGen. Again, top guy. I mean, Jason's super good, and it'll be again fascinating. So be here next week. I want to thank everybody again for listening to the Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization show. We really do value you. We know we have a lot of other places to listen and participate. So don't forget to go to googlizationnation.com and sign up. You'll get notifications of our upcoming shows like next week's Jason Averbook. We got a full slate in, I think we're booked up through March. There might be one opening yet, and we got some very, very interesting people coming on board. But within Googleization Nation, you'll get notified about the live streams. Didn't do one this week, but did 5 in the last week. Some webinars we're thinking about doing. Keith and I are going to do one on ROI. Live stream, and you got to give me the date. Looking at doing a couple contests and kind of juicing this up a bit. And remember to kind of order Recruiting in the Age of Googleization Edition 2.0, and you can get that at join.googleizationnation.com. Keith and I, we're always interested hearing from you. I know we don't hear a lot during the show, but we do get a lot of comments LinkedIn, so keep them coming. We got a nice review this week as well. Let us know how we're doing. If you want to be a guest or a sponsor, share that too. You can go up to geeksgeezersgoogleization.com. There's a form up there. You can contact us directly. Thanks again to Zor.ai, Success Performance Solutions. Don't forget to join us next week, Wednesday, 1 p.m. Eastern Time, w4cy.com, or you can listen to our podcast on Spotify, Apple, Google, iHeart, or wherever you happen to listen to your podcast. Until next episode of Geeks Geezers Googleization, this is Ira Wolf and Keith Campagna. Don't let the shift get your plans.